Clark-Wilson preserves the integrity of information, so you already know which of the CIA triad this is focusing on, through two primary elements. One is well-formed transactions, and the other is separation of duty. A well-formed transaction prevents users from manipulating transactions after they've been recorded. In other words, we're concerned about preserving data as it was originally put in by an authorized person. And then the separation of duties prevents users from manipulating transactions that are not part of their job function. Again, Clark-Wilson is very reminiscent of the types of security models that are used to enforce Sarbanes-Oxley. And then we have the BIBA model. BIBA has similar characteristics of Bell-LaPadula, but it also integrates the integrity element into its security model. So BIBA addresses the aspects of Bell-LaPadula where users can write up and read down depending on the security level, but it enforces a model that allows no write up, no read down. BIBA demonstrates a model that implements both confidentiality and some elements of integrity. Okay, so now we look at threats to security models. Some threats to security models include covert channels, backdoors. Also, that's a synonym for maintenance hooks. That would be a type of backdoor. Buffer overflows. And then each of these threats have countermeasures that we'll discuss and should be implemented to prevent the effect each threat can potentially have on the corporation's information. So let's talk first about covert channels. A covert channel is unauthorized information flow to an external entity through the use of a channel that is not being monitored or controlled. The channel being used is usually developed as a path for information to flow between applications that have been exploited by hackers. Countermeasures to this include intrusion detection systems, third-generation firewalls, internal and external auditing. Backdoors is a tool integrated into the software that developers have put in there on purpose to help them with software maintenance so that they don't have to go through sometimes the time-consuming and laborious process of logging in, making sure that their password is right, typing all that stuff every time they want to get access to the system. So they would put these backdoors in, which allow them to just rapidly jump right in to the code and start doing whatever they need to do. The backdoor allows the developer to bypass all security controls and gain access to the information more quickly. They think this is a way to improve their efficiency, but it becomes an institutional way to compromise the integrity of the system. Okay, countermeasures to these sorts of things are intrusion detection systems, string access controls, and again, internal and external auditing. Then we talk about buffer overflows. A buffer overflow occurs when software is not programmed to check the length of the input data. Now, this is fairly simple to explain, and I'm going to draw a little picture here to help explain this. We hear a lot about buffer overflows. People use that terminology a lot, but if no one's ever explained to you exactly what this is, then it's worth a brief moment to explain the concept. When a programmer is writing a program, he's going to set aside a certain space for input so that if he goes out with a program statement and he wants to read in a string of some sort, and then he's going to assign that string to a specified area, in memory. Let's say this is going to be 256 bytes big. And so as the string gets read in from the user, it's going to go into this spot, A, B, C, D, ba, 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 ba. All right. The string is going to go in here. Now, if the programmer is not careful to first of all check the input string and make sure that it doesn't exceed the buffer length, then let's say that a hacker is putting in a string into the system, and the hacker puts some stuff in the first part of this, but the string itself exceeds the buffer length. And so the program commonly, if the programmer hasn't thought about doing this, will continue to write into the space following this particular space allocated for that input. Now, what happens then, a clever hacker will put data in at this point and then begin to write executable code in here. Okay, with the consequence being that at some future point, when the system goes to execute code, he's been overwriting what was executable code. This code will now be executed, and his code will begin to execute, which will direct the machine to do various and sundry things that you don't want it to do. This is what we mean by a buffer overflow. It stopped simply by making sure that when the programmer programs the software, that when he's reading strings in from user input, that he checks the length of these ahead of time to ensure that they do not exceed the space that he's assigned in memory to read those strings in. If they do exceed that space, then he either truncates them or issues an error message or whatever else needs to happen. This is the whole idea behind a buffer overflow. Okay? Now, buffer overflows are fairly common methods for violating the security of a system because programmers are not as conscientious and systematic as they should be about ensuring that when they read information into the system, that they guarantee that it is not going to exceed the length of the buffer space that they've set aside to read it into. All right, so that's a brief explanation of what we mean when we say buffer overflow. All right, so the developer of the software can integrate a checkpoint that does not allow any information in excess of that checkpoint to be processed. If the developer fails to integrate this, then that extra data eventually may be executed by the CPU, and that if that data has been written properly, it can turn control over to the hacker. Countermeasures include ensuring that all of your programmers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then auditing both internally and externally for that, and then following the OWASP guidelines that are found out at OWASP.com, which is a common body of knowledge now of things that application developers, of software developers, should be following as they develop application software. If you're not familiar with those guidelines out at OWASP.com, you need to go out there, read those, and that needs to become part of the policy that you use for your application developers. We'll talk more about that when we get to application security, which is a later domain. So, brief review here. When we talk about the second domain, security architecture and models, we need to have management have consciously and then in writing addressed what is going to be their response to this privilege of least principle, which security model are they going to be using and why, and then how are they going to address threats to these security models. They should be addressing at least covert channels, backdoors, and buffer overflows. Once all of that is written out, then management has properly addressed the second